There's a world out there, it's a digital maze where dollars move in mysterious ways. Complex systems, rules, and regulations. The payments professor sparks revelations. No need to fear the Fed now.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Payments Podium. Today we're going to be talking about cash. Well, and the digital aspects of it and the handling of it. And I know a lot of you are probably going, but Payments Professor, you're usually talking about regulations, you're usually talking about faster payments, you're usually talking about digital payments. Why cash? Well, to help us explain all of that, I have Brian Bailey. He is the president of Clip Money. He's going to be actually leading this charge on, well, working with cash. So Brian, would you please say hi to everybody?
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me, Kevin. Pleasure to be here.
All right. Well, before we jump in the conversation, one thing that I ask all guests that come on is, how in the world did you end up working in the payments industry? Because a lot of people, when it comes to the payments industry, we got here by accident, and it's usually an interesting journey. And a lot of people that are following the Payments Podium are people that are looking to advance their careers, and they like learning from others to see what their path was to get here. So, Brian, how did you end up working in the payments industry?
So Kevin, I've had a really amazing career so far in terms of the experiences that I've been exposed to, and they all started with a company called NCR. NCR, as many people know, is a leading provider of point-of-sale retail terminals as well as ATM machines, and they're in service to the banking industry. And so I grew up marketing, selling, running product management for an ATM company called NCR. And over the course of 20 years with NCR, traveling around the world, I learned a lot about cash and how consumers use cash every day, primarily as they withdrew cash from ATM machines for their daily life and their daily payment habits. And so over the years, I learned a lot about not just cash payments, but also about how banks were trying to transform their consumer journey from a physical in-branch experience to one that is much more digital. And so I worked on projects with digital banking, with digitizing check processing. We all are very familiar with taking pictures of checks with our phones. NCR provided all that technology, still does to this day, to banks around the world. And so I became very accustomed to working with banks on how do we move customers out of the bank branch? How do we make their life easier with digital technology and ATM technology? And so that led me to the next big problem to solve, which was, how do we not just help consumers with their digital needs? How do we start to help businesses as well? Because businesses, in many respects, businesses who tender in cash, have been left behind by this consumer technology journey. And so that's what led us to think of this wonderful idea that Clip Money provides today.
Okay, so you start off with NCR, and I'm actually quite familiar because I got to say, back in the day when I started working with remote deposit capture before it was even legal, I did a lot of work with NCRs and people there. We may have crossed paths at one point in time. But anyway, to get things moving on, you mentioned, people using cash, but you also mentioned businesses using cash. And I guess the thing I would have to ask is, how do you see the role of cash evolving for businesses when we're living in such a digital age where everything's digital? Everybody's doing their transactions on their phone. So where does cash really fit in? How does that look like when it comes to businesses?
So businesses today, Kevin, while we all are enjoying the benefit and convenience of digital payments, whether it's credit, debit, real-time payments are entering the scene as well now as well. But the reality is that cash still has a very important role in terms of consumer access to in-person payments. And what we mean by that is, when a consumer walks into a business and makes a purchase, cash still makes up about 20% of those purchases, which is a pretty significant element. It also makes up a very large percentage of small value purchases. So think quick serve restaurants, think gas stations, convenience stores. Consumers still do rely upon cash quite a bit for their day-to-day proceeds. And so that's the sort of dilemma that businesses have. It's a very important payment instrument that they must offer to their customers. We've seen a number of businesses over the past 5 years, who have tried to eliminate cash in terms of their daily intake. And that's really been met with a lot of consumer backlash, as well as a decrease in their own revenue from payments. So cash is still alive and well. However, it is declining, and that's something that businesses are wrestling with. How do we deal with this declining payment instrument, and how do we handle it cost effectively while still making it a democratized offer in terms of payment choice?
Well, you mentioned cash declining, and I hear a lot about hey, we want to get rid of checks too, and they're declining but not going away. But you also mentioned like gas stations and convenience stores, and that makes me think: are what types of businesses are really out there that are really still relying heavily on cash? Are there any certain sectors, industries that we see cash is still prevalent and maybe making up that 20% that we should be aware of?
Yeah, so I mentioned two important segments: convenience, quick serve restaurant. There's a number of other specialty retail, general merchandise still tenders quite a bit in cash, hospitality segment as well. So it's really a wide swath of businesses who still tender in cash. And while that may be decreasing, it's still very important. The other element, Kevin, is who is using cash today at a higher rate. And a couple of those trends, and this was in a Federal Reserve study, the Health of Cash, it's a 2023 study, which is the most recent one, is finding that adults 55 years and older are still using cash at a much higher rate, as well as lower income consumers. And we see this in Clip Money's business every day in terms of when the economy starts to wobble a little bit, people return to cash in terms of cash management of their personal economy. So credit cards begin to go out the window because people use cash to more acutely manage their own budgets on a regular basis. So there's a very real trend that happens there, and we think that's why cash is very important moving forward.
Well, and I know Dave Ramsey doesn't need me to give him an endorsement. He's doing fine on his own. But I know from somebody like me who's been through his courses, I got a lot of friends that have done it too, that he and others out there teach that cash is tangible, it's in your hands, and it's a much better way to be able to budget and work with your finances. So I get that, and I love that you threw that in there too. Now, I think though the thing is when it comes to cash, especially for businesses, the handling of it, the depositing of it, that can be challenging for them, right? I mean, what are the challenges that they have to face to be able to deal with and work with cash to this day?
Yeah, this is something we face every day when we talk to clients, enterprise businesses, small businesses across the North American market. And I was with a treasurer of a very large shoe store that is in many of our shopping malls today. And he's been in the business for nearly 35 years. And he told me, he said, Brian, when I started at this company 30 years ago, we were handling cash in our stores the exact same way that we're handling it now. So I'll sort of revert back to the comments earlier about we've been blessed with all this digital technology in our hands. We've got mobile phones that can make P2P payments or scan checks, but businesses have really been left behind by financial institutions as well as other technology providers about how do they digitize cash, how do they make it easier to handle in stores, and how do we innovate on something that's been, quite frankly, lack of innovation over the last 30 years. And so the other big thing we see within our retail customers is this dilemma of labor, right? Labor costs have gone up exponentially for most of our retail store owners, which means they want their employees in front of customers, servicing customers, as opposed to going to the bank branch every day to deposit cash. And the reality is many businesses are still making that journey to the good old-fashioned brick and mortar branch, either putting their cash in a night drop in the side of the branch or walking in to visit the teller. That is a costly hour and a half to 2 hours every single day, which business owners just can't afford anymore. One other point, I talk about digitization of technology. Many businesses are still using good old-fashioned paper deposit slips. They're writing down how much cash they're depositing. They're handing that over to a teller. So there's none of these wonderful digital tools and dashboards that we believe are important to businesses moving forward.
Okay, so what that makes me think is that's operational inefficiency that's really taking place. If they're having to do things physical, if they're having paper slips, that is a problem in a digital age. And I love that you pointed out too, and I hadn't even thought about this, is we haven't seen big advancements in handling cash, like, I don't know, forever. I mean, it's not much different than the Wells Fargo wagon, going back to the early 1900s and how it's still being delivered, except instead of a horse, it's a car, but it's still physically having to go to the location. So are there maybe other operational efficiencies that could, that we need to educate people on when it comes to working with cash payments?
Yeah, I think let's talk about the cost of cash in terms of processing a cash deposit. So I talked earlier about many of us listening to this probably haven't been to a bank branch since we signed a mortgage or since we went for a notary. We're just not going there anymore. There's no reason to. However, businesses are that last mile of transactions still walking in. We were working with a large regional bank in the Southeast about a year ago, and they told us that they had done an end-to-end analysis of the cost it takes to process a business deposit over the counter. And what they told us was when they added up all of the touches and handoffs within the bank in the back office, it was a $30 transaction for them to process, right? So I think this is a really important thing for the banking industry. No CEO of any bank is waking up every morning saying, I want to be the very best at processing cash in my branches, right? That's just not a strategic objective, I don't think, of anybody. So we believe there is a really important disruptive element of how do we handle cash more cost effectively? How do we reduce the cost per transaction from that $30 transaction to something that's way more inexpensive for the business, way more inexpensive for the bank, and really creating a next generation of cash deposit ecosystem? And we believe the way to do that is at Clip is to create a shared network of cash deposit opportunities for business. So instead of visiting the bank branch, Clip enables any business to deposit into their bank account through the Clip network. And that can be done through a night safe or Dropbox. It can be done over the counter at a retail store, or it can be done through an ATM at a retail convenience store as well. And so these are the new opportunities to allow many businesses to use our network to reduce that cost to deposit, helping banks as well as helping those businesses as well.
So, okay, if I'm hearing right, the trend is happening is that when it comes to working with, businesses and their cash management, what we're seeing is first of all, you mentioned going to the bank. There's not that many bank branches in some locations. A lot of branches have been closed in some locations, and you don't really hear or see many brand new branches being built up either. So I think that's a problem too. And the way you're saying to resolve it is to give alternative options of where that cash can be deposited. Is that correct?
Exactly right. It's exactly right. So let me kind of use this analogy. We all have debit cards in our wallets, and those debit cards have a little emblem on the back called Plus or Cirrus, right? And those are the networks that support ATMs around the world. We could use that card practically in any corner of the planet and still receive money from our bank account. So we can use other people's ATMs, these shared networks, Visa, Cirrus, MasterCard, et cetera, create a system for us as consumers to access our cash. Nothing like that exists for businesses today. If you're a business that banks with the community bank within your community, you have to deposit at their location for deposit into your bank account. And so what we built at Clip is a shared network, North America's first shared network that allows businesses to deposit into their bank account of choice, wherever that bank may be. And so that is really the new innovation here. It's something that's not novel for consumers or payments, but it is very novel to businesses. And Kevin, one of the reasons why you may ask, well, why hasn't this been done before? And one of the reasons why it hasn't been done before is because businesses are very different than consumers. Typically a business, it's not the owner of the business making a daily cash deposit. It's an employee or it's a store manager. So the premise of giving them debit cards to go use ATMs is very difficult. You have to manage PINs and cards. And so what we've done is built a purpose-built platform that allows a business to assign rights to different employees to go use the Clip network to make their daily deposits. And so that's an important innovation that we've solved for that sort of opens up this new opportunity.
Okay, I got to ask the obvious question. I'm sure you've heard this before. There's the cash trucks that come around, the delivery trucks. Why not just use those?
Yeah, great. That's a really good question. And armored carriers do serve a really important segment of the market. So I talked about, 90% of businesses today still go to the bank branch to make deposits. Another small percentage use armored or cash in transit services, the big cash trucks, to come every day or a couple times a week to pick up cash in their premise. And what I would say is both are perfectly good options for certain types of business. If you're a very cash intensive grocery store or Walmart, it may make sense to have a large cash in transit relationship. What we find though is those services are quite expensive, and they're quite expensive specifically for smaller and mid-sized businesses. They're typically long-term contracts, and they become really less and less reliable for businesses. And so we believe there's a new opportunity here to allow businesses to, again, create locational convenience, endpoints that are near to their business, which keeps their employees in their store, while still radically changing the cost for businesses to make deposits.
Okay, so I get that. It's going to cost less. And I'm wondering, though, too, if I go with your solution, if I'm understanding it right, it gives me the option to make deposits in multiple places. I don't have to go to the bank branch itself. But is it going to give me any improved efficiencies by using your system that I wouldn't see from somewhere else? Just like physically going to the bank. I mean, is there any advantages there?
Let's talk about sort of this concept of how do we go from paper to digital when it comes to cash, which is a bit of an oxymoron. But we do believe the time is now to digitize a cash transaction. And what that means is, today I mentioned that when a business goes to a bank branch, they hand their cash over with a paper deposit slip. The bank then counts that cash, and then sometime 2 to 3 days later, that transaction will show up on a business's bank statement that says you made a deposit. What we do is we've taken our platform and we allow businesses at the very point of login with Clip to declare what their deposit is. We allow them to enter the denominations into a very usable interface, be it a mobile phone, be it a web browser, that basically creates the start of the transaction, so that if you're in the head office of a large retailer, my store XYZ is going to be depositing $500 today made up of these denominations. We then can start tracking that deposit all the way to the Clip network and the Clip endpoint and share with that head office where that is along the way. And then Clip processes that deposit into that bank account the very next day, next business day. And so we believe that whole paper trail or digital breadcrumb trail is important for treasurers. We can get ahead of loss prevention issues. If there's maybe a store that has not deposited in a couple of days, why is that? We do that all inline and through digital alerts and digital notifications to business through our technology platform.
Okay, question that's come up for me then is, if you're doing this, the digitization part, right? You digitize everything, that's in your platform. And you mentioned treasurers. My experience with treasurers is they're going to tell me, hey, you're going to give me a file I can import into my software. You're going to give me something I can work with in my applications, or am I going to be stuck just using your service? Because I know people like to be able to have it in their native environment, that where it works for them, so they can create their spreadsheets and everything. So do you offer anything like that?
Yeah, we do. So if you're a treasurer, you're typically looking at, on a daily basis, your credit, your debit, and your cash intake as a business, and you're going through a daily or regular reconciliation of those transactions. Are the transactions that happened at the store what are now showing up in my various bank account statements? What we do is we provide to our customers a daily file, if they choose, to integrate into their reconciliation systems. And so we work with a number of again, very large multi-store retailers who take daily intake files from us. In some cases, we have a store employee who may miscount a deposit. They may miscount it high or low, and we have to reconcile that after the fact. We do that all through our system, and we do it all in line. So instead of human beings on the back end, as a bank branch would do, dealing with that reconciliation, we do it all through technology, and we allow that integration through reports and alerts back to a back office or home office of a business.
Okay, Brian. Something that just came to mind, because I heard the words loss prevention, and you mentioned it, and when people aren't making the deposits, but you also mentioned somebody miscounting things. I got to go to the dark side. What about if I've got somebody theft, fraud taking place? Or do you have any ways of being able to detect that, stay on top of that?
I think this is where the daily cadence of seeing a deposit in the system across a store or number of stores becomes very important. Because in the previous world, or in the current world of how businesses make deposits, you may not know of a fraud event, either whether it's an internal or external event, until days later. And so what we're doing is we're accelerating that by providing a platform that can send out alerts if something's not happening when a business expects it. And so we've not seen a lot of internal issues, but it does happen from time to time where a store manager may not have made a deposit in a couple of days. that proactiveness enabled by our platform is very important for businesses. So it's just something that has been an improvement to loss prevention, not a reduction, and something that creates greater visibility of cash for businesses to get ahead of those issues when they do happen.
So you're basically able to identify the trends, know what's normal, what's activity should be taking place, and kind of like my phone that will sit there and say on certain times, hey, you normally leave and go do this at this time. Why are you not doing that now? You give those types of heads up alerts.
That's right. And the other thing that we have to be very attentive to, and we've done this since very day one at Clip, which is we want to be the most transparent solution in the market, even at or above banks when it comes to identifying activity that is not in line with regulation. So, for example, you hear cash and you hear things like money laundering, which happens at times. Our platform now allows us to see trends in deposits, be it volume of deposits, be it time of year deposits, be it, hey, this cash intake just doesn't seem logical for this type of business. We can now provide to banks a digital first approach to say, this pizzeria who's depositing $50,000 a day doesn't seem quite in line with a legitimate business. And so those are the types of AML tools that we now have access to through our system that in many cases cannot be found when a paper deposit slip is handed over the counter. So we're going to continue to raise the bar on regulation and risk, which is very important for FIs, obviously, and make sure we're using that to flush out any things happening in the system that regulators would want to be aware of.
Yeah, you got to keep the regulators happy. So I'm glad you went there, but I got one more area I got to hit on. Mm-hmm. Cash, a lot of people say, hey, it's dangerous. There's got to be security in place. So what security measures do you have to help, in the protection of making sure it's a safe and secure deposit?
I think the key premise of Clip is how do we keep store employees closer to their stores as opposed to jumping in a car and driving 15, 20 minutes to a bank branch. We do believe that crime happens. However, if we can create a network of devices that are highly convenient and local for businesses, one example is we have over 500 drop boxes for cash in shopping malls across the US today. And so what that allows is every mall tenant or our customers to go to that drop box and make a daily cash deposit as opposed to walking out of the mall, getting into a car and driving to a bank branch. That is an infinitely more secure experience. Typically, deposits are made even before the mall opens or after the mall closes in the evening. So it's a highly secure environment, much more secure than what happens today. And we think that's an elevated experience for the employee, in addition to not having to stay, quote unquote, on the clock to go to the bank branch to make that deposit on behalf of their employer.
So give them more options that are closer to,
That's right.
They can make that decision. I
That's
like
right.
that. All right, I got another question. I need you, though, to pull out your crystal ball for this one. What's the future going to look like when it comes to cash management? I mean, how do you see the future of cash management, the use of cash evolving?
Yeah, I love to look back at my career and see what's happened in other examples of payments as they've declined. And so one example I've already given today, which is this shared network for ATMs around the world. If you think back 15 years ago, every bank on the planet wanted to have their own ATM network. They said, this is strategic for me. I want to have my own ATMs. They need to be convenient for my customers. And that's an important value proposition. And now many banks are saying, you know what, there's some perfectly good ATMs that are already in the market that I want to give my customers access to. We call those shared ATM networks, shared surcharge-free ATM networks, where we can use a common piece of infrastructure, an ATM, to service multiple banks' customers. We believe that's a trend that we can leverage and take advantage of, and that's how we're building our business model. How do we help banks and businesses to lower the cost while creating an elevated experience in a digital way? And that's exactly what we're doing. The other example, maybe it's a little bit more recent, is this concept of P2P payments. And most of us today are using our favorite P2P tool of the day, be it Zelle, be it Venmo. And if you again rewind the clock 10 years ago, most of the major banks, specifically the big three, were trying to build their own P2P product. They were spending millions of dollars saying, I'm going to build my own and I'm going to use it as competitive weapon. Well, what's happened since 10 years ago is many of them have adopted this wonderful payment mechanism called Zelle, right? So they said, why are we all competing on something that is kind of commoditized transaction? And so that's another example of where, hey, let's go create competitive advantage in different areas, but using this shared network now called Zelle is something that is across community banks, credit unions, and major banks. So another example of where we think business deposits will go in time as we create a wonderful, convenient network and lower the cost for everybody involved.
All right, that's great. But I got one last question for you. This is some innovative stuff. So, I mean, this is great. And I love how you started off showing us your career path. And a lot of people, though, that follow the payments podium are also looking for, not just new ideas and how to look at things, but things that they can do to advance their career. So I would ask you, as a president of a company that's pretty innovative there, what advice do you give to people coming into the industry today to say, if you want to have a successful career, if you want to be able to, do good in this industry, these are the things I think you should do. This is what I would do, or this is the advice I would give you.
Yeah, payments Kevin, are moving so fast, right? You mentioned real-time payments and crypto, and it's an amazing industry to be in right now, and it's going to continue to innovate. One thing that I learned probably a little bit later than I would have hoped in my career is really understanding the economics of payments, because payments is really unlike any other piece of software solution that you can sell in the marketplace, in that there are many people in the ecosystem of a payment that have an economic value share of it. So just take credit or debit as an example. You've got issuers, who are the banks, who have a vested interest in taking a piece of a payment. You have acquirers, who are actually the organizations who acquire those transactions and process them. You've got networks, right? The networks out there who actually take the data and process the transaction on behalf of the issuers. And so every one of those ecosystem players has a vested interest in a payment itself. And what are the individual economics of a payment? The example I love to give, because people like to jump to the conclusion that cash is the most costly payment transaction out there. And I love to give the example of, if you're processing a credit card in a retail store today, and let's just use generic numbers, it's typically a cost to that retailer of about 3%, give or take, depending on who you are. And a cash transaction, at least through Clip, is going to be probably no more than 40 to 50 basis points, right? So we think about the cost of transaction and payment processing, really understanding the economics and who makes money of those transactions. That's a huge element. If you can master that or be aware of that as an up-and-coming payments leader, I think that's where you're going to find the greatest value to organizations you work with.
Yeah, dig deeper, get that deeper understanding of what's really happening. And one last thing before I do let you go, how do people get a hold of you if they need to?
They can reach me at bbailey@clipmoney.com, or they can hit our clipmoney.com website. We'd love to see you out there to learn more about our business.
Excellent. All right. Well, all of you out there listening, following the Payments Professor and the Payments Podium, if there's a topic or if maybe there's somebody that needs to be on the Payments Podium, all you got to do is email me, kevin@paymentsprofessor.com. And I'm going to have to bring this episode of the Payments Podium to a close. We got to learn a lot about cash management and the innovations that are happening out there. And Brian, I thank you for being here today. But this is the part where I got to say, class dismissed.
There's a world out there, it's a digital maze where dollars move in mysterious ways. Complex systems, rules, and regulations. The Payments Professor sparks revelations. No